On a quiet stretch of land in Liberty County, Texas, the earth once hid a secret. It was 1980 when a construction crew stumbled upon a shallow grave, bones tangled with strands of long, reddish-blonde hair. A woman was buried here, without a name, without a story, without justice. They called her Jane Doe, and for over 4 decades, that's all she was, until a twist of DNA, decades-old memories, and tireless investigators would finally piece together the truth. Her name was Carol Sue Skidmore, and her story is not just a cold case, it's a warning.
Welcome to Crime Bite.
In this channel, we peel back the layers of those hidden realities, raw evidence, conflicting testimonies, and emotional pleas for help that too often come too late. By looking into these crime bites, you'll see firsthand how broken trust, systemic oversights, and chilling motives can converge into stories that rattle us to the core. If you find this exploration as vital as we do, be sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notifications button. Together, we can shine a light on the cases that demand attention, ensuring every voice, especially the silenced. The summer of 1977 in Texas was hot, heavy with silence in places where answers should have lived. Carol Sue Skidmore was a 23-year-old mother of 2, just another face in a town filled with stories. She was soft-spoken, reliable, and didn't make waves. That's partly why her sudden disappearance barely caused a ripple. When she vanished, there was no statewide alert, no midnight searches, no media frenzy. Her children were told she had gone away. But Carol didn't just leave. She vanished from the lives of everyone who loved her, leaving behind a void filled with silence and assumptions. In a time before Amber Alerts or internet campaigns, missing women could fade like chalk on pavement. Carol Sue became one of them. And for decades, her story went untold. In April 1977, just months after Carol went missing, authorities discovered a woman's decomposed body in a shallow grave in Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana. The grave had been hastily covered as if someone had tried to bury the truth and run. There were signs of violence: no ID, no purse, no name. Investigators made a composite sketch. They fingerprinted the remains and collected dental records. But in an era without centralized databases or forensic coordination between states, the woman became another Jane Doe. Over time, the case went cold. The file was shelved, the sketch yellowed, and the grave, while marked, stood largely forgotten. But she had a name, a past, a family who never knew where she went. Her name was Carol. In 1970s Florida, James Ronald Skidmore was on the surface an all-American husband. To outsiders, he was a hard worker, steady, dependable, the kind of man who shook hands firmly and said ma'am with a drawl that felt comforting. But behind the doors of his modest home, his charm turned to cold steel, and Carol Sue, his wife, bore the brunt of it. Carol had married young, full of hope and dreams. She believed love could fix what was broken. But James wasn't just broken, he was dangerous. Their marriage became a battlefield of control and coercion, where silence and submission were Carol's only weapons for survival. The bruises were carefully hidden, her cries muffled behind the walls that were supposed to protect her. In that era, a woman's fear was her own to carry. The law often looked the other way. Neighbors muttered about family troubles, but kept their distance. The emotional toll was just as brutal as the physical. James chipped away at Carol's identity until her confidence was brittle. Yet, through it all, she clung to the one thing he hadn't stolen from her, her children. Her love for them kept her anchored. But even love can fray under pressure. By 1977, Carol had begun to imagine another life. She whispered her fears to a close friend, someone she could trust. She talked about leaving James, about starting over, about safety. But she also knew what leaving meant. Women who leave abusive partners don't always get second chances. The most dangerous moment in an abusive relationship isn't the first slap or the harsh word. It's the moment the victim decides to leave. James had grown suspicious, and he wasn't the kind of man to let go. Then there was Lynn Dale Mahaffey, James's shadow, drinking buddy, and perhaps more. Where James was cruel, Lynn was cold. Together, they were a cocktail of danger and opportunity. Rumors would later swirl about things said in garages, about maps, about whispered threats turned into terrible actions. By late March 1977, Carol Sue was gone. No police report, no search party, no one held accountable. She had simply vanished, erased from the story she never got to finish. Like, subscribe, and share your opinions in the comments section below. When someone tries to reclaim their life from an abuser, why does the escape so often become the beginning of something even more terrifying? It was supposed to be a routine day. A land surveyor, clipboard in hand, was charting the boundaries of a dusty plot of land slated for development. The ground was cracked and dry, the wind hot and lazy. Then his eyes caught something pale protruding just beneath the soil. At first glance, it looked like a bone, but it was unmistakably human. Within hours, the area was transformed into a crime scene. Forensic teams arrived in hazmat suits, delicately brushing away decades of dirt, insects, and sorrow. What they unearthed was a story buried not just in the ground, but in silence and shame. The body was skeletal, sun-bleached and fragile. Pieces were missing. Time and nature had tried to reclaim her, but what remained told a chilling story. The woman had suffered trauma to the skull. Her ribs were fractured. The positioning of the remains suggested she hadn't simply collapsed and died. She'd been placed there, dumped, forgotten, covered up like a shameful secret. Nearby, a plastic bag had been buried. Inside were scraps of fabric, long strands of tangled hair, and something else. Traces of blood, and what appeared to be part of a woman's blouse torn at the collar. The kind of detail that turns a body into a story. No purse, no IDAME. She became Jane Doe number 1977 CO, catalogued, photographed, and moved into cold storage. There she sat, frozen in bureaucratic limbo, as technology struggled to catch up with tragedy. Her bones whispered of violence, but no one knew her voice. Years passed, then decades. A forensic artist once tried to reconstruct her face. The image was haunting, hopeful, but no one recognized her. The public was asked for help, but no matches came. Her case grew cold, her grave grew colder. Then came the revolution, DNA forensics. In the 2010s, investigators began submitting old evidence to emerging genealogical databases. At first, there was no hit. But in 2023, a break came. Subtle, almost accidental. A distant cousin had uploaded their DNA for ancestry research. And through that tiny thread, investigators began to weave a larger net. The match was partial, but enough. They reached out to Carol Sue's grown children. A DNA sample was collected. The comparison was conclusive. Jane Doe was no longer anonymous. She was Carol, their mother, their mystery, their heartbreak. And with that name, the hunt for the truth began again. Only this time, it had the weight of science, the fire of grief, and the unstoppable determination of a family that had waited nearly 50 years for answers. What does justice mean when the victim has been silenced for decades, and the suspect has lived free for just as long? She had vanished in Florida. That was the strange part. Carol Sue Skidmore was a young mother with a warm laugh and quiet determination. In the summer of 1977, she left her home in Florida with her estranged husband, James Ronald Skidmore, and their infant daughter, heading for what she told family would be a new beginning. But she never called again, never sent a letter, never came back. For years, her disappearance remained a black hole in family memory. Her parents filed reports, but police couldn't track her down. James claimed she had simply walked away from the family. But the story never felt right, especially when he later moved to Texas, remarried, and cut all ties with Carol Sue's side of the family. Her daughter grew up without answers, only whispered suspicions and the ache of abandonment. Then in 2023, her name emerged in a database match. Thanks to familial DNA submitted to GEDmatch by a distant cousin and combined with forensic genealogy efforts, a breakthrough occurred. The remains from Colorado matched to Carol Sue's bloodline. The shock rippled across state lines. A woman who had disappeared in Florida had been murdered and buried in Colorado. The case file that had once been labeled missing person was now upgraded to homicide, and the prime suspect was still alive. Investigators now had the most critical piece of the puzzle: identity. But the path to justice wasn't immediate. James Ronald Skidmore, now in his late 70s, was living a quiet life in Texas. He had built a second life after Carol's disappearance. A new family, a new job, and a carefully constructed narrative of his past that excluded Carol Sue altogether. For decades, he had lived freely while her body decayed in a forgotten grave. Detectives began digging deeper into his history. They found inconsistencies in his original story, bank records that contradicted his timeline, Witness statements from former acquaintances who remembered James saying suspicious things about Carol running off. But what really nailed him was his reaction when approached for DNA. James initially refused. Then he lawyered up. His silence, his evasion, they spoke volumes. And when a judge ordered a court-mandated DNA test, the result was irrefutable. Biological material from the crime scene matched. In a dramatic 2024 arrest, Skidmore was taken into custody and charged with the murder of his wife. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family members, and advocates of cold case justice. Carol Sue's daughter, now in her late 40s, sat silently in the front row, tears falling freely as the charges were read. "My mother didn't leave us," she said to reporters after. "She was taken. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your comments." How many more forgotten graves lie buried, waiting for a name, a story, a sliver of justice? In the wake of the DNA breakthrough, a family long denied closure was finally given something to hold on to. A name, a story, a truth. Carol Sue Skidmore had disappeared from Florida in 1977. Her daughter, only a child at the time, had grown up in the aching void of unanswered questions. Over the years, she became her mother's voice, tirelessly posting on missing persons forums, giving interviews, sharing age-progressed sketches, and whispering into the ether in hope that someone, somewhere, might remember something. Now, more than 4 decades later, she had an answer. But it came wrapped in horror. Her mother had been dumped like trash in a Texas field, stripped of her name, stripped of her dignity. And no one had known. The daughter spoke to reporters, tears running freely down her cheeks. She was more than a case file. She was a mother, a sister, a human being. "We finally have her back, but we also now have to grieve her all over again." She called on other families with missing loved ones to keep pushing, keep hoping, keep sharing. What does justice look like when time has already stolen so much? Authorities knew that Carol Sue's body had lain in the Texas soil for decades, but the question now was, who had put her there, and why? The answer came from cold case files, rumors long forgotten, and a surprising new round of witness interviews. Names began to resurface. Men who had once been close to Carol. One of them, her husband, James Ronald Skidmore. He was already long dead by the time the case resurfaced, but police began cross-referencing his movements in 1977. Alongside him, a name that sent chills down the spine of investigators, Dale Mahaffey. The two men were linked not only by association but by a troubling history of violence, drugs, and run-ins with the law. What the investigation unearthed painted a horrifying picture. Domestic abuse allegations, financial troubles, threats overheard by neighbors, a woman terrified of her own home. Detectives believe Carol was trying to escape, possibly from her husband's control, possibly from something far worse. But she never made it. No formal charges would be brought. Both men were dead. But in the eyes of investigators and Carol's family, the puzzle had been solved. Can a case ever truly be closed when justice is no longer possible? For years, the field where Carol Sue Skidmore was buried had no name, no visitors, no stories. She was buried under the placeholder name Jane Doe, with no funeral, no obituary, no one to speak her name. A silent field held her secrets while time marched on. After the identification, local officials and Carol's daughter worked together to relocate her remains. A proper headstone was placed, one that bore her real name, one that finally told the world she existed. A community gathering was held near the field. People who had never met Carol came to lay flowers. A pastor read verses about remembrance. One local woman said, "We didn't know her, but she was one of us, and we failed her. This is our way of making it right." The field that had once hidden a crime now became a place of remembrance. How many other fields hold the names we've forgotten? Carol's story is more than a cold case solved. It's a window into how countless women go missing and are never found. It's a portrait of institutional neglect, a reminder of how easy it is to forget those who disappear without a trace. Her daughter, now older than Carol ever lived to be, continues to advocate for missing persons cases. She speaks at conferences, she supports other families, and she tells anyone who will listen, don't stop searching, don't stop asking questions. In a country where tens of thousands of people remain missing, Carol's story is both tragic and triumphant. She may have lost her life, but she reclaimed her name. The echoes of her disappearance may never fully fade, but now they carry purpose. How many voices do we lose to silence before we learn to listen? After 46 years, Carol was no longer a Jane Doe. Her identity was restored, but her killer, still unknown. Her case, like so many others, is a cold trail warmed only by the persistence of love, science, and a demand for justice. For every Jane Doe in an unmarked grave, there's a family still waiting. For every silent scream, there's a chance to listen. The question isn't just who killed Carol Sue Skidmore, it's how many more are out there still waiting to be found. If you believe every missing woman deserves her name back, her story told, and her case solved, then don't let her fade again. Like this video to honor Carol Sue's memory, comment with your thoughts or a loved one's name who still needs justice. Subscribe and turn on notifications to uncover more cases where silence has lasted too long.